All right, good evening. Thank you all for being here tonight. My name is Carl Chow. I'm the Executive Director of the Dallas Historical Society. For those who are not familiar with us, our mission is to collect, preserve, and exhibit the history of Dallas and Texas so that we can educate current and future generations. And thank you very much for being here tonight. We have a lot of programming that we do throughout the year, brown bags, our evening with, such as this one tonight. To keep up with all that we do, you can go to dallashistory.org, become a member, and you'll know about all the programming. So tonight for our evening with, I want to introduce Mr. Ron San Angelo. Ron was very kind to give us his collection. He is a photographer. He was born in Beaumont, served 2 tours in the U.S. Navy during Vietnam on the USS Brinkley Bass. In 1974, he started his photography career as a portrait at the portrait studios of Giddings at Neiman Marcus. And he parlayed that into 1979, where he got a job with the Dallas Cowboys as the official photographer for the Dallas Cowboys. During his 30 years with the Cowboys, he captured countless historic moments, Super Bowl championships, and NFL record-breaking performances. He's photographed legendary musicians, along with being the photographer for the Roman Catholic Diocese of Dallas. He's published 10 books. He's a member. He's been recognized by the Pro Football Hall of Fame, the Texas Sports Hall of Fame, and the list just goes on and on. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to let him come out and tell you all about Ron San Angelo and all the great things that he's done.
Thank you, Carl. Hello, everybody. This is going to be very informal, okay? Let me recognize a couple of people. That lady, Tony Washington, stand up, Tony. The long friend of mine, we go way back. She was a Dallas Cowboy cheerleader, extraordinaire from back in the day. We got Gail Nogel. I've got my glasses off so I can read, so I can't really see real far out there, but I know she's out there. Dan, my friend Jay, a lot of folks here that are friends of mine, so I appreciate you all coming. We're going to do it a little different. Let me start off by saying, actually, very recently, 46 years ago, a few days ago, I got an angel sent to me by God. And I want to say that my life has been blessed by God, and He sent me an angel that's kind of guided my life, and nothing that I'm doing would be happening without her, because she supported me, and it's been a great life. I want to start by asking if you guys remember anyone here, a great sports columnist. His name was Blackie Sherrod, Dallas Morning News. Remember Blackie? And I used to read Blackie every week. He wrote a column in the Dallas Morning News. And I know a lot of those Dallas Morning News guys from my work with the Cowboys. I did not know Blackie, but I read him. And he had that column called Scatter Shooting. I don't know if you remember, he'd kind of cover all the topics. Well, that's what this is going to be, scatter shooting. So, without further ado, Greg's going to get us going. I'm going to kind of jump around a little bit. I've got my notes made. I want to start off by saying I'm very grateful for the life and the images that I've been given that you're going to be seeing. And what's going to happen, these are going to just keep rolling, because I just talked about them one at a time. You aren't going to hardly see anything. So they're going to just roll the whole time, just see a variety of work. My pictures speak better than I can speak for them. And most of you a lot of friends here are photographers, and they can relate to that. But my life was kind of divided into two parts for photography. The work I did with the Cowboys, which was recognized because it was historic, and then the work I did with the Diocese of Dallas. No problem. I want to thank, and I think I've sent a few of you a little, an ad that Coach Johnson, Jimmy Johnson, who I grew up 20 minutes away from. He went to Port Arthur Jefferson and I was at Beaumont High School. And he was like the first one to recognize my work and gave me a one-man show back in the early 90s when he had been coach of the Cowboys. So he's been like really instrumental. I was really happy I worked with him on his Hall of Fame induction and did some pictures. My work's at the Hall of Fame, so I provided some pictures for him at the event. You'll probably see, there's a Hall of Fame picture right there. You're going to see pictures of me as a kid growing up. And let me just kind of, as a background, I've always had a passion for sports. I played sports as a kid growing up. I played all the sports. Had an eye for the poetry of motion with the elite athletes that play sports. I started shooting seriously probably at the age of 15, taking a photography class at Beaumont High School when I was a junior. Or I guess, yeah, I think I was a junior. And there's a kind of a rule of thumb. It takes 10,000 hours of doing something to become like expert at it, let's say. It doesn't really matter what field you're in, you know, what kind of vocation you have. It's about 10,000 hours to really become a craftsman. But now, 60 years later, I'm still shooting. I enjoy, I just took a trip to Europe and photographed all over Europe. It was wonderful. Coming out of high school, I joined the military. I joined the Navy. And I was like a senior in high school when I joined, and then shipped out in '68 for Vietnam. First tour, and I ended up doing 2 tours over 6 years in Vietnam. I was there when Roger Staubach was there, actually, and I invited Roger to come tonight because we're both Catholic, and he and I had a lot of the same experience. Although he was an officer, I was a boatswain's mate. I basically drove the ship around, but I started collecting camera equipment because it was really cheap overseas to buy it, and a lot cheaper than it was here. And we would go to Japan or Hong Kong, or even on the bases, the naval exchanges, you could buy, you know, camera equipment and things. And so that's what I did. I submitted some of my work to a publication called Stars and Stripes. It's a military publication. It's been around a long, long time. I'm thankful to be an American and have been able to serve in the military in combat for my country. As I look back and you realize some of the close calls that you go through doing that, because it's real easy to get hurt when you're in the middle of the ocean or in combat upriver with Marines and things like that. But you're 18, you don't really think about it. You're not really afraid. You just want to do your job and do your duty. There is a old country western song. My heroes have always been cowboys. My heroes have been athletes. And some of my heroes growing up were Roger Staubach, Tom Landry, who I ended up getting to know. He and Tex Schramm, along with Suzanne Mitchell, hired me to do work with the Cowboys. But guys like Mickey Mantle were big to me when I was a kid. Willie Mays. I mean, if you've seen some of the old films, the classic old films where they You know, you see those things, the Johnny Unitas's, the Don Meredith's, the Bart Starr with the Green Bay Packers and all of that sort of thing. I was like really captivated by that. So that kind of, I jumped over what Carl was talking about, which is where I started photography at Giddings, Neiman Marcus. That's where I really started honing the craft of photography. And the craft of photography, and I'm speaking to people in the audience that know this, because when we started back in the 60s, we were handling film, processing usually ourselves in a dark room that we made. And when my wife and I first were living down in Houston, we were living in an apartment flat in the Montrose area down there, if anyone knows Houston. And I had a studio in my living room that I actually did some major photo shoots in. I had a dark room in the kitchen. I was processing my own film, and just, it's really hands-on. And when I worked at Giddings, I started working in their lab originally. So I learned, we were doing things like dye transfer. I don't know if any of you know what that is. That's a kind of printmaking, because our clientele was very high-end clientele, kind of like the Highland Park of Dallas, let's say. And so we sold the work for a lot of money, and it had to be perfect and great. And I saw guys take a 40 by 60 dye transfer print that if it wasn't quite in registration, because in those days you would make a negative the size of the in print. That was our finest product, dye transfer. And you would marry the red, green, blue layer, and it had to be exact. Otherwise, it'd get slightly blurry. And if it wasn't perfect, they'd throw it away. They'd go over to retouching, and they'd, nope, do it over. And so you learn early on that it has to be like perfect. And that sort of informed the way I worked. And then when I went to the Cowboys, you really felt like you were stepping up into like a big league world of, I can just remember walking into Texas Stadium. For me, having watched it on TV as a kid and then walking in there to work was like pretty overwhelming. But you have to get right down to business doing that type of photography. And even photographing the cheerleaders. And Tony will attest to this. They work really hard. The cheerleaders work really hard. And I want to spend just a minute talking about Suzanne Mitchell, who was a very close confidant of myself and my wife, because my wife was assisting me at that time, and we were all friends. And Suzanne was the one that kind of convinced us to relocate to Dallas. So really fond of Suzanne. And in those days, I remember you have an idea of what these beautiful girls, you know, what they're about. But then when you get behind the scenes with them and you start working with them when they're preparing, practicing every night, you know, for next to nothing to do this, and the effort they would put into it. And I remember Suzanne used to defend them, and she would say, because sometimes, you know, people would portray them in a negative light, and she would say, well, I don't know anyone that would take their Christmas vacation and go around the world to entertain our soldiers and sailors around the world for the USO every year. They'd give up their Christmas holidays to do that. And so I always had a very high respect and appreciation for these women. They were athletes too, terrific athletes. And they were trained by, back in the day, Texie Waterman was one of the choreographers, a long-time friend of Suzanne. Some of the ex-cheerleaders, including today Kelly Finglass, who is the director now. I photographed Kelly, and now this is one of the girls. I don't know if Tony was a cheerleader when Susanna Were you with Susanna? But she was like from the 70s, and we ended up doing some work with her. And just getting to know those girls, they became friends, and like Kelly, who was under Suzanne, she's kind of like Suzanne. And everyone who's been a director, I think there's only been a few over the years, kind of come out as like Suzanne Mitchell model. So she was very instrumental getting me going with the Cowboys. The one thing, I like to look for moments that transcend sports, and I'm always trying to get ideas for doing things in addition to like just regular action photos that you see a lot of. But like that photograph right there is the implosion at Texas Stadium shot from the tower at the University of Dallas, where I later became a student. And when I went up on that tower back in '92, I think, and I had an idea for a picture I wanted to do on a Monday Night Football game. And so I just went to their administration building and said, I'm with the Cowboys, can I go up in your tower and do a picture on a Monday night? And they let me in. And I had never been up there, and I had all my gear with me. By myself, I didn't have an assistant with me. And then when I started climbing the tower, it looked a lot shorter from the ground than when I got in it. And it's like you're going around like this, zigzagging up there, and you keep looking and you're going, God, it keeps getting further away. It's like climbing a mountain. And I finally got up there. Luckily, this picture was probably shot maybe early November. So it was cool, but not really cold yet. And when I got up there, it was probably around, I know the start of the game, and the lights would all be on, and I wanted the parking lot full. You'll probably see that picture roll through here one of these minutes. But so I got up there, and when I got up there finally, there was nothing but like a flock of pigeons that lived up there, which I was not prepared for, and no one mentioned to me that, and pigeons aren't real, I don't know if any of you are Seinfeld fans, but the deal that they used to talk about, we had a deal with the pigeons, we're okay on the statute defecation, and they don't get in our way, so we run over them. But so they had, let's say, decorated that area for some time. They were living up there. And not only that, that tower is really tall, and when you get up to that elevation, it's really windy. And because I was a Boy Scout, I always carried things like, mainly because I'm shooting Kodachrome film, which is like the ASA of the films that we were shooting back then for, let's say not sports, but just for regular photography. It was like 25, 40. I would shoot type A film for effects. But I knew it was going to be a long exposure, and so I had brought a bunch of bungee cords, and I had my tripod, so I'd like nail that thing down. And I got probably 10 or 15 shots off, and I ended up, one was, just right. Back in those days, a lot of times you would edit your film. That's from the Vatican. But you would edit your film like this. I'd blow it up on a big white background so I could see if it was sharp. And it was like you feel like you really accomplished something if you planned something and it actually turned out like what you had hoped. So I'm looking for images that kind of transcend sports. I studied with a guy by the name of Robert Gilka, who was the legendary picture editor of National Geographic. I hold him in the same regard as someone like Arthur Heitzman, who was the senior photographer at Giddings, who photographed Sophia Loren, like celebrities, very well-to-do people. He was a master photographer. And I learned so much from him. And then in working with Bob Gilka, this was up in Aspen or Snowmass. If you guys are snowbirds, you know that area up there. I went up there and I had just enough money to spend a week with Gilka, rent a car, and I had to camp. And I camped in a place called Maroon Bells. I don't know if you guys have ever been up there. It's beautiful up there. And I wasn't going to be spending much time around the campsite anyway, because to get the permission to even take the workshop, what Gilka had us do was like what he had all photographers do who want to shoot for National Geographic, whether you're contract or you're like a staff photographer. I don't know that they have staff anymore nowadays, but they used to. And you would have to give them a story that you wanted to photograph that you thought would work for National Geographic, and then tell him how you were going to do it, and then convince him that it would be good enough to go into National Geographic. And I did some research, and I found out that they had the first female forest ranger that had been hired up at the state park in around Aspen. She was like one of those mountain bikers, and she did everything. And so I told him I was going to photograph this girl. I called her, see if I could get permission to do it. And as we all know who are photographers, and I don't know how many people here are photographers, but I know several of you are, so I'm going to talk like that. We would have to get, you know, your permissions and everything like that in advance before you could go do anything. Just like if you're coming out to shoot out here at the Hall of State or something like that, unless you do like me and sneak in and shoot when no one's around, which I did, that's kind of having your work buttoned up, is like getting prepared for doing something. And one of the things I always did, and it comes from working with people like Gilka, the cowboys, you have to be at your best all the time. And you always want to impress them with your work. So you're always trying to come at it at a different angle. And one of the nice things about studying with National Geographic, because they were ruthless when they would edit your film and they'd just be throwing, nope, not that one. But you were basically learning to tell a story with a set of photographs. And it had to do with varying your scale, working your subjects, depict them in different lights. And you can look at any National Geographic story and see the work that goes in there. And if you know how much time and effort these guys that work those assignments do for weeks and months on end sometimes, that's what it takes to produce that level of photography. But that made that impression on me that each photograph, I used to try and think of, I wanted to be a quintessential, whenever I could do it, like a quintessential photograph, something that no one else saw. And I came up with the idea, and I executed, and it worked. And then when it worked, you had something really special and unique. And I used to call them one picture essay. I can tell you one story right now, and I'm going to kind of mix these in. It was the NFC Championship game. We were playing, I don't know if you guys remember Brett Favre. He was quarterback for the Green Bay Packers. He was a really great young quarterback, came down here to Dallas, and it was a really great game. And it's like the John Madden, Pat Summerall days for those of you who follow sports. And I had this idea of Troy Aikman, just looking to see, that's in Lambeau. That's Tom. That was shot here, by the way. But I had this idea that I'd love to get him coming into the stadium, and you'll see it out in the lobby. They've got a standing exhibit with some of my photographs, and that picture's in there. And he's walking in through the fog And it's the last time they ever did that at Texas Stadium. They put this big helmet up after that, and you couldn't do it anymore. But I got that photograph. And I got up there, and one of the nice things about being staff, or in my case, I was not really quote unquote staff, I was contract. And so, but I basically was shooting like for the team. And so I traveled with them. I had complete access to go in the locker rooms, things like that. And so I knew all the security people, and they would let me go up, mainly because I was only going to be there a minute to shoot my pictures. And that's Gilka right there. That's the guy I was talking about. And so I got up there, and other people are coming, but I was looking for Troy Aikman, because at the time he was the last guy that came out on the field. And when I was up there, every photographer and video photographer from all the TV channels were in front of me, shooting toward me. And they're shooting Troy because he's coming towards them. And I wanted him entering the field, and I shot it with a 20 millimeter lens, one of my favorite wide angle lenses. It's great. It's like everything's in focus with that. So you get the drama of the place, and it was a great day, and the colors are great. You'll see it if you go walk down the stair or back up and see it in the hallway. But I made that photograph and got it back, and once again, you're shooting film, so you don't know if you got it until you get your film back. And this is one of the funny things, because I've got some friends here that were with me back then when we would all meet up at a place called BWC Photo Lab. And I want to mention someone, because some people close to me have recently passed away, and one of them was a guy by the name of Ramsey, who ran a place called Competitive Cameras. And I'm a Nikon guy, and Ramsey had the Nikon gear going way back. He was a real go-getter, a very hard worker, and I knew him and his son Eugene. Ramsey passed away recently, I think, in the last couple of weeks of cancer. But we would run into each other, buying supplies over there, film, paper, whatever. Ramsey usually had everything, including equipment. And being a Nikon guy, you know, I would buy my gear. I'd like to buy my gear from people like Ramsey, because I'm an entrepreneur, small business owner myself, and I like to trade with small business owners. You know, whether in where I live, or, you know, where I shop versus going online, for instance, or a major store. Now, that's not to say I didn't buy things from big stores. I did, but whenever I could, I'd buy things from guys like Ramsey. And his son, I'm sure, is going to keep that place going. And then, so I wanted to mention him. Talk a little bit about spending time with, like, when you start getting to know these guys, and back in those days, as opposed to today, the players, for the most part, stay on the team, the same guys. Once they assemble the team, you know, whether by draft or trade or free agent, their free agent was just starting toward the tail end of the dynasty period with the 90s Cowboys. That group of guys, you could get to know them. And once they know you, and I would give them pictures all the time, you know, and not ask for anything, because people are always asking them for stuff. And all I wanted was access, and I wanted them to forget that I was there. And so I would shoot, you know, no flash, all available light in the locker room. And so they really weren't aware that you were shooting. And whenever I could, I would use maybe a short telephoto or something, so I didn't have to get right up on them to get close to them. And getting that kind of access, nowadays it's pretty common. But back then, you either had to be attached to the team, because guys like coaches that I worked under, Jimmy was real particular about the locker room. Bill Parcells, another one. Now, a lot of them have to kind of do what Jerry Jones tells you what to do. But back in those days, Jimmy kind of ruled the roost, and he put that team together and kept it together. But the interesting thing is, very few people get the chance to do that. You go behind the scenes, you get to preserve these iconic moments that happen, and they become historical. I mean, that's why we're here. I like to think of it as my life at 1/500th of a second, because that's usually the shutter speed I was shooting at a lot of the time, and to freeze action. But pictures are fleeting. And there's a friend of mine down in Houston, his name's Joe Baraban, another great photographer. And I was talking to him, and we were just talking shop, like when we'd have card games at my home with all my photographer friends and the late, great Bob Mader. I don't know if any of y'all still remember Bob. Would all come to my home, we'd play poker and have barbecue or something, and we'd talk shop. And I remember talking to Joe, and one of the best pieces of advice, and I actually thanked him again recently for doing this, or telling me this, because it's true, that when you're photographing sports and things are moving so fast, it's really easy to miss things. And if you know ergonomically your camera, you're so tuned into it, like the way I used to shoot, I'm nearsighted. So, you know, nearsighted people like me used to take your glasses and do this all the time. And it was really hard to try and, you know, your glasses would fog up and stuff like that. So I switched to contact lenses. But then I think one of my eye doctors told me, have you ever tried monovision? And I had never heard of it. And what it is, and nowadays you can do this a little bit. It's not quite the same, but you can, there's a little diopter on your camera that you can sort of set it for your, whatever your prescription is. But I used to put one contact lens in my shooting eye, and then I would leave one out of my distant view. And it wasn't really sharp, but my myopia isn't terrible. I can see, I just can't see sharp. But I needed to be able to see the controls on my camera. And by doing that, I was able to shoot and then pull away and make adjustments on my camera without having to fuss with my glasses all the time. And so I started doing that. And when the shutter clicks, you realize you've preserved a moment in time for history. And that's kind of what this is all about. That's post-game. This is one of the perks of the job, is getting to photograph people like Nelson Mandela and getting to meet him. That is Brock Marion, for those of you who remember back then. Here's an interesting picture, and I'm going to kind of go back and forth. They're all looking at a guy, I forget the kicker, was kicking a game-winning field goal. And you can see the suspense on their face, because if it goes in, you win the game. If he misses it, you lose it. And so the anticipation of that, most people would be shooting the field, right, to get the shot of the kicker. I wanted to shoot, that's the ship I was on, by the way. And here's another thing, that they would take my pictures and put them on T-shirts called stat shirts, and then they would run, that's me at Texas Stadium. Let's see, there's 3 Super Bowl, so that's probably mid-90s. Personal letter from Troy Aikman. I did a lot of stuff with Troy. I photographed his memorabilia for him in his home, and that's from over in Europe this year, or last year actually. Oh, by the way, that is Gil Brandt that I photographed. I did next door here a tribute to the Cotton Bowl when they moved over to Jerry's AT&T Stadium. This is the cathedral. I call that shot the Trinity. That is in the Piazza at the cathedral for any of you who've ever been down there. And when at Christmas or on Guadalupe's feast day, which is December the 12th, they usually put roses in Christ's hand. And I saw that, and when I saw it, I immediately thought of the Trinity. And so that's what that picture was about. I'm jumping around here, but I warned you. One of the nice things about traveling with the Cowboys, you go all over the world. I got to go to London. I'm a tennis player. So when I was in London, I went to Wimbledon. We were there after the tournament. The tournament's going on this week. But we were there for the American Bowl. And there's a picture in here somewhere where Michael Irvin, I got him wearing the baseball cap they gave us that, you know, it's American Bowl in the year we were there. I think it was 93 or something. This is another kind of shot, this shot of Troy. I like to do a lot of things in motion. It's a tricky thing to do, but when it works, like that particular photograph was, I don't know if you know who Charlotte Anderson Jones is. She is Jerry Jones' daughter. She's marketing vice president for the Cowboys right now. And she's got a 30 by 40 picture of that shot in her office, which I was very complimented that she liked that photograph because her and her whole family are totally into artwork. If you've ever been to AT&T Stadium, you know it's full of art. That Gene Jones has been involved with putting artwork all over the stadium over there. But I mean, you'd get things like, you never had to wait, you know, in traffic. When you travel on the team buses, even if you're abroad, you got a police escort everywhere. You're like traveling with rock stars, and these guys are like rock stars. And interestingly enough, the day I think I photographed the triplets, we were in Oakland, California, playing the Raiders. And before the game, we had a guy on the team named Charles Haley, who was a defensive end, who was a great guy, but he was like, I'm trying to think of that mental condition where you're super high and low. Joanna, you know the word? Bipolar. He's bipolar. Okay, so we're going in to the stadium on the team bus, and I would sit, you know, with the players traveling over there. I usually take first or second bus, and we're driving in there, and they're pelting us with like eggs. And I mean, the one thing about the Cowboys, you have a lot of fans on the road, and then you have everyone hates the Cowboys when you're on the road, especially the other team's fans. And so it was so funny. They were screaming at the players, beating on the bus, because you're driving really slow to get down under the stadium to where the players can get out. And Charles Haley got up and started beating on the glass. He opened the window from the inside of the bus, and he's right in front of me doing this. He opens it up and he's leaning out there grabbing these people. And I'm just going, you don't know what you're gonna, you just never know what you're gonna see, you know, when something like that happens. But when these guys are getting ready to go play, they are all amped up. They are totally amped up. And so when they're challenged like that, either by fans or the other players, and they trash talk each other all the time. I'm sure they're still doing it. But I had never seen that before. So a lot of things like that would happen because you're that close, you know, to the team, and you witness some of this stuff, and a lot of the things that I witness, you know, I just don't talk about. It's like private inside stuff that happened You know, sometimes you can talk about it, sometimes you can't talk about it. See where we're at. That last picture, by the way, was from the exhibit that Jimmy did. You may have noticed it was me and Troy, Jimmy Johnson, and that was a photograph I did out at the NFC Championship game in San Francisco when it was totally raining out there. And I also did a shot called Moose in the Mud, and it's also out in the lobby here. You can see it. As the players were walking in, it was like a monsoon. And in those days, the San Francisco 49ers played at a place called Candlestick Park. And it was a great old stadium. I used to live in San Francisco when I got out of the military. And I used to go to Giants games out there, San Francisco Giants in August. It was freezing cold out there. It's below sea level. But usually in early part of the January, February, when the playoffs are going on, that's the rainy season out in California. And that particular year, it had rained so much that they had to pick up the middle of the field, which was grass, and put down a new field. And the guy that does the Super Bowl grass came and did that. But as they were walking in, once again, I saw this picture of the mud, and I said, if I get above to shoot down, and this is one of the things that you learn as photographers. You want to explore all the various angles of seeing something that if you just take a straight-on shot of it, it's not that interesting. But and I remember Jay Maisel telling me, he's a New York photographer. A lot of you probably know who he is. He was photographing sunset at I think he was across the river shooting back when the Twin Towers were still there, back in probably 70s, or no, I don't know when they were built. I'm trying to think. Was it 70s or 80s? But it was when the Twin Towers was there. And so he's looking, and this is one of the things he impressed on me too, is that you want to like explore your subject so you're looking at it from every different angle. Now, a lot of times we get into situations where we don't have time to do that, so you have to like maybe pick a couple of ideas and go for it. But he was like trying to shoot a sunset shot, and he was turned one way, and his wife was with him. You know, they were just out at sunset photographing. Jay's the kind of guy that, like Gail, has her camera with her all the time. Jay always has his camera with him. And he's not happy what's going on. And his wife is tapping him on the shoulder. And she said, "Turn around, stupid." And so he turns around, and there's this glorious view that's one of his like all-time like notable photographs. You probably, there's the shot. That's the shot. That's Daryl. That's an homage to my wife. That's my wife when we were first married. Had to slip one in. This was when Emmett broke the rushing record. Actually, Dan was with me that day. Dan and I were shooting together that day. We shot that. We shot the post game. I was hired by Emmett's agent. And this is an interesting story. One of my ideas when I was shooting for the Cowboys and I was pretty well known as a very successful photographer for them, and my images were well known. And what I used to do, and Jerry let me do this, and you have to understand, I knew all of the executive staff out there, his family, their secretaries, and you don't get to people like Jerry Jones without going through someone like Marilyn Love, who was a lovely lady who passed away recently. She was like, in the last couple of years, along with Barbara Goodman, who was Tom Landry's secretary, a very close friend of mine. She was Jimmy Johnson's secretary and personal assistant while they were there, as well as Barry Switzer. And then she retired, and she was a really good friend of mine. But I said, you know, I've got all these great pictures, and let me put them up in the halls. And so my pictures were all over the halls, and trying to think. I had a really great shot of Emmitt Smith, and he was just about to break the NFL rushing record. That's, for those of you who don't remember, he's the all-time leading rusher in the NFL to this day, and that record will probably never get broken because running backs, just in the way the game is now, don't do that anymore. But I get a phone call, and it was from a guy by the name of George Hayes. He was vice president of marketing, and they were planning the whole year around Emmitt Smith breaking the rushing record. I think it was 2000, 2001, something like that. And his agent, I think from Florida, was in town. And he was sitting in the office with George Hayes and Charlotte and, the Jones family. And all my pictures from all those Super Bowl games and all these pictures you're looking at were on the walls at the Cowboys headquarters. And he goes, who took these photographs? And they went, that's our photographer, Ron. He said, get him on the phone. And so they call me up, and usually when you're working for the Cowboys, and at that time they were in Valley Ranch, I don't know if y'all remember where that was, over off 635 and MacArthur area. And I lived in Grapevine South Lake, so it was close. I was over there all the time using the racquetball courts for studios, if we were photographing players, or still lifes, or even portraits of Jerry. That's a thing I did for Jimmy. I don't know how many of you heard the little promo Jimmy did for me to announce this event, but I did that for him when he got into the Hall of Fame because I thought it was a real, along with Drew Pearson, a real slight that they hadn't recognized him and put him in the Ring of Honor and the Hall of Fame. He's in both. This is the kind of stuff that I was kind of talking about after Emmitt had a really big game. That's Troy retiring ceremony at Texas Stadium and Stadium Club. That is the St. Peter's Basilica in the Vatican. It's so amazing. This, one of my favorite photos, there's a good story here, and it's going to lead to another story. I'm good friends with the Carmelite nuns of Dallas, very good friends. And actually, my wife, Joanna, she helped them out of a jam on a bill that they were charged by the city, and it was wrong, and she basically got it fixed for them. And I go to a traditional Latin Mass, and they had a chapel out there that we didn't have a church, and they let us use their chapel for there was only like, I don't know, 500 or 600 of us that would go out there, and even then I don't think there were that many. I think early on there may have been a couple of hundred. And I remember calling out there before I went to Mass one Sunday, and I was told that was out there. And so I called up, and some nun answered the phone, and I go, is this Mater Dei Catholic Church? And she says, yes. And I said, well, I'm trying to come out there for Mass, and I don't know where you guys are. And she said, well, we're down Loop 12 past 30 off of Jefferson. It's a real mixed bag down there, but they have this beautiful monastery down there. And I said, well, I'm coming to Mass this weekend, and I just wanted to get directions on how to get down there. And she said, have you ever been there? And I went, no. And she said, come early. And I went, you mean before Mass? I mean, early? And she went, if you want to sit down. And so I go down there, and I'm devout Catholic, okay? And we're going to talk about that here in a little bit. But they gave me permission to photograph in their gardens. And they became very close. I'm like a patron of theirs now. We have a church now, but we still have Mass down there, and it's still wonderful and glorious. There may be a photo in here somewhere of one of the Masses there, their location. But that photo with the snow and the crucifix is in their gardens. And I don't know if you remember a few years ago, this would have probably been 2010-ish, we had a bunch of snow in Dallas. It was like in our yard, we had like, I don't know, 12, 14 inches of snow. And I said, oh, this is beautiful. You know, I got to go out with my camera and photograph. And I called down there and I said, would you give me permission to go photograph in the gardens with the pristine snow down there? And so I went down there. And when you go in, it was just me by myself. And I walked in, and this gentle snow was coming down. And I've got my camera, and I'm standing in front of that crucifix. And it was like, I felt like I was walking into heaven. I mean, it was so peaceful. It was totally silent. And this is one of the things about the Latin Mass. It's a very quiet service. Even the low Masses, you can barely hear the priest uttering the rubrics of the Mass. It's just very, very reverent Mass. And quiet, and being quiet, and being in the presence of God is, you want to be reverential in that way. You don't want to be banging guitars and stuff. And so I'm hooked on that Mass. You'll see one of my books that I did on that Mass called Sublime Mystery when we leave here. And you're all welcome to the copies for whoever wants one. And if you want me to sign it, I'll sign it for you, or anything else. But that experience kind of got me into doing a lot of what I call sort of transcendent photography. And if you're not understanding spiritual matters, like I said, when I met my wife, I think that is totally, God made that happen. And I mean, I know this, that when you're in a relationship with someone, any of you are married, it's like a covenant relationship. And if you believe it, and especially if you're Catholic, it's you, your wife, and God. It's its own Trinity. And so I was drawn to that, and I know that the life that I got to lead was given to me as a gift. Now, I decided I could spend the rest of my life trying to repay that gift. And one of my favorite movies is a movie called Chariots of Fire. Anyone ever seen it? You know who Eric Liddell, the runner that was the missionary? And he wouldn't run on the Sabbath. He was Irish or Scottish, I think. And he said a line in that movie because his sister or his family member, he was going to become a missionary. It's a true story. And he ended up dying in a prisoner of war camp or in China in World War II. And they said all of Scotland wept when it happened because he was an Olympian. But this woman wanted him to give up his running because he had this gift he was super fast. And he won all the races, and he was an Olympian. And he told her, he said, her name was Jenny. I don't know if that was her name in real life, but he said, look, I want to be a missionary. I want to go to China, but I've got to do this first. And she was very against it. She said, that's a violation of God. And he said, but God made me fast. And when I run, I feel his pleasure. And that line stuck with me because that's the way I feel about what I do. And most of us that are photographers, I can guarantee you, have the same exact feeling about that. That when you're working and shooting and creating, you feel that creative like burst, and you feel like you're like sharing in a creative field. And I want to mention a couple of more things. I don't know how long I'm going here. I'm getting toward the end, but I did want to hit a couple of things. I had an opportunity. There's someone here from the Diocese of Dallas, but I know I shoot for them, and I did a book that's out there, and I'm trying to think. you may have seen the shot of the cathedral. It's up in the hallway. You'll see it, a print of it. I had to photograph the cathedral as part of the book. And I had an idea for the photograph that, I'll try and make this quick. I wanted to get an up angle, and I went into an office building across the street trying to find an angle, couldn't find one, was about to give up, no one was around. I went to get back on the elevator, and a guy got off and started walking down the hall, and something came over me, and I walked up to him, and I said, look, I'm shooting for the cathedral, I'm trying to find an angle to the cathedral across the street. Do you know anyone up here that has an office with a view to the cathedral? And he goes, I do. And I went, really? And I'm thinking, can I take a look? And he said, sure, I'm going back to my office right now. We walked in there, he opens the door, and there in front of me is this vista of the cathedral, exactly what I was looking for. I handheld the shot, I shot it through the glass window, so you're right up on the glass, so you're not hitting reflections, right? And that photograph, number one, it doesn't exist anymore. But if you look at the photograph, there are no people in the photograph. There are no cars on the street. And for all of you from Dallas who know downtown Dallas, at lunchtime, it was shortly after lunch when I shot that photograph, that never happens. There's no cars, there's no Photoshop in that. There were just no cars. And to me, when things like that happen, those are like gifts, okay? So let me finish with this. Everyone in this room has won the greatest lottery of all time. Beyond anything you could ever imagine you could win in a regular lottery. And that's the lottery of being born into this life. I am a student at University of Dallas. I study math. I study law of probability as one of my things. So I did a study on the scale of the universe versus our individual life and wanted to calculate the odds of that happening. In the scale of the universe, to be born a human being, American on top. It works out 1 in 400 quadrillion is the odds of that. And if anyone knows anything about how many numbers that is, that would like go probably around the earth a couple of times. The point being, it's not luck, okay? And this is one of the things when you start thinking things through, and then especially when you're experiencing things. Well, why am I here? You know, why did I get this life? And why do I feel I owe, you know, and I finally figured it out. This is what I came up with. I believe the purpose we're here is we were chosen by God to be here, but we're also to be witnesses to his creation. And I don't know about you, but I've been to places on this earth and seen incredible splendor. As a photographer, and you go to a place, I've been up in Canada, up in a place called Banff on Lake Louise at Christmas with a moon, full moon rising between these two mountains and just being so swept away by the grandeur of it all. And I live in Carmel. You probably saw a shot of a coastline in Carmel. I shot from where I used to live. When we go out there and visit, we stay where Clint Eastwood owns these cabins where I used to live. And I got this beautiful sunset over there that's right across from Point Lobos. It's just a gorgeous thing. And so the last thing I'm going to tell you, my favorite Pope, John Paul II, he wrote, it was called A Letter to Artists. This is the last thing I'm going to say, so thanking you in advance. So what is the difference between being a creator and a craftsman? The one who creates bestows being itself, ex nihilo. Does anyone know what that means? From nothing. So you create from nothing. That's what God does. And when I say nothing, for for those who don't understand the concept of absolute nothing, not like zero space, but nothing to create the universe, okay? He brings something out of nothing. And in this strict sense, in a mode of operation, which belongs to the Almighty alone, the craftsman, by contrast, uses something that already exists, to which he gives new form and meaning. In other words, we recreate, taking from things that are already created. We can't create from nothing, but we can take things that are created and then rearrange them, recreate them, and photograph them or witness something fantastic and document it. And to me, that's what we're doing now. And I just wanted to leave you with that thought. I remember Saturday Night Live, Deep Thoughts. That was my deep thought to leave you with. And I want to thank you for your patience and attention. I love the Dallas Historical Society. I'm very honored to be here. Thank you, Carl.
Very much. So you all know we have some giveaways. Once you exit the auditorium, there's a counter in the back. So if y'all go out that way, you will be able to get something for this evening. And I think Ron said he'd even go down there and autograph some of that. So thank y'all very much for coming out tonight, and we look forward to seeing you at our next program.